Poy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for your good grace over the last 24 hours and allowing me calls. I think this piece of legislation, and there will be many markers as we see Christchurch get back up on its feet, but this is a very important marker for the city of Christchurch following the earthquakes of 5 years ago. And this piece of legislation, I think, proves the worth of the legislative process here in this House. And people may wonder why we have second and third readings, why doesn't the government just say what it wants to do and get on with it? But I think this process, and especially from our side of the House, proves that the legislative process is a good one here in this House, because this piece of legislation has taken an interesting route through this House. It was introduced 6 months ago. We supported it to Select Committee. At the Select Committee stage, there were changes made that we weren't happy with. And through good work of the Minister, and I acknowledge the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, and various ministers, members of Parliament from the opposition, and I acknowledge my colleague Dr Megan Woods, we've landed at a piece of legislation that every member of this Parliament will be in favour of. And I think that is a very important note to make around the future of Christchurch, because there is no dissent. Everyone in this House is reasonably happy, and I think quite happy, with this piece of legislation which will frame the rebuild of Christchurch, a city that I grew up in. So I think credit should be given to the government and Mr Brownlee for looking around this House and saying, OK, how do we make this work if you're not happy with it after the Select Committee stage? And significant changes have been made to allow more community input, more consultation, and I think that will make it better in the fact that the people of Christchurch will feel much more connected to a rebuild that will happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I acknowledge the part that the government has played in that and being willing to work to a consensus where everyone in this House is happy with it. One of the points that we are very happy with, as I've mentioned, is the ability for the community to have much more input. I think it's widely known that there has been some criticism in the stages from the earthquake up until now that they feel like they have been dictated to from Wellington, and not having spent enough time down in Christchurch to gauge whether or not that's fair. I think members from Christchurch on our side of the House may say that, but in this piece of legislation they're given much more opportunity to have more of a say in how their city will look over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which we thank the government for. Also set out in this piece of legislation is, in addition, post the Select Committee stage, is the inclusion of the 4 well-beings, which, despite being removed from the local government legislation, I think importantly have been included in this piece of Christchurch legislation, because it is not just a matter of rebuilding the buildings in the city, it is about the heart of the city as well and the soul of the city. And the regeneration of Christchurch will take into account the environmental, economic, social and cultural well-beings that I think on this side of the House will be very important to the social cohesion and growth in Christchurch. So we thank the government for taking that on board as well. Again, to point towards a change that was made at the committee stage by my colleague Dr Megan Woods is a protection around Hagley Park to ensure that, I guess, that green space right in the middle of the city cannot be affected in any way by any changes or any rebuilding that might go on as part of the process as we look to make Christchurch a much stronger city. I think that's important. It's a very important recreational space. Whether you play cricket, rugby, hockey, or whether you're walking through the botanical gardens, the people of Christchurch value that space, and I think it is something that is relatively still the same as it was before the earthquakes, and they want it to stay that way. It's a place that they value very much, and the SAP from my colleague Megan Woods ensures that and protects Hagley Park. To finish up, because I've got very little time left, I would like to wish Regenerate Christchurch all the best, because it has got a very big task on its hand, and I thank again the Minister for being willing to work towards a consensus that this House is happy with, and therefore I hope will serve the people of Christchurch much better.